There are more lives claimed, victims claimed, than toxic shock and Legionnaire's disease combined. And yet most of the country doesn't know about this cancer.
Why?
Well, I think it's because it's a gay cancer.
Think about our nation's history, the Declaration of Independence, the Salem witch trials, and World War I, pivotal moments in our past. Not many people realize that some events in the 80s, a time of funky music, funky clothing, and even funkier hairdos, would be such a transformational part of our history. The time is June 5th, 1981. The first case of what will be known as AIDS is reported. AIDS is a condition which occurs when HIV has caused serious damage to the immune system. Most symptoms include tuberculosis and pneumonia. This is different from HIV, which is a virus that leads to the deterioration of the immune system. In the early 80s, HIV and AIDS meant certain death, as proper medication was not yet created and the disease was in its early stage of research if there was any at all. Reports in LA claim that previously healthy, gay men had pneumocystis pneumonia. This will be the first official reporting of what will be known as AIDS, or acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
From 1979 to 1981, rare types of pneumonia and other illnesses were now being reported by doctors in not only Los Angeles, but in New York among several male patients who had intimate relationships with other men. Also, a small number of heterosexual women were now reported to have this disease.
By July 3, 1981, as the dots started connecting, there were 26 patients exhibiting similar cases of pneumocystis pneumonia between New York and California. However, the general public would not truly know about AIDS until the mid-1980s. The term AIDS wasn't even used publicly by President Ronald Reagan until 1985. An article from the New York Times titled "New Homosexual Disorder Worries Health Officials" from May of 1982 describes the whole as a mysterious disease. They do use the term AIDS, but also refer to it as GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency. Some people do not refer to AIDS as AIDS even. Instead, others called it different types of rare cancers and others a gay disease. The term AIDS was sometimes even used as a slur. The disease in its early years, when its origins of transmission were still unclear, triggered waves of discrimination and homophobia. During this period of time, people were certainly concerned and started to become more and more cautious. Patients who appeared to be gay would not be touched by police or ambulance workers, and funeral homes refused to handle AIDS cases. This would all be due to the fact that people were afraid of merely a touch of people with AIDS.
It is also important to hear this story in the eyes of a nurse, such as Jamil Velasquez. Velasquez has been a registered nurse for 20 years and has worked with AIDS patients for the first 10 years of his nursing. Here in these clips, he talks about his experiences with AIDS and AIDS patients.
In the beginning, when they used to come to the emergency room, nobody knew what AIDS was. There was no such thing as AIDS. They used to call it FUO, and that stands for fever of unknown origin. And people were very scared because they didn't know why these people were getting sick and they didn't know how to treat them.
Some religious, social, and political leaders would identify the epidemic as God's judgment or a plague on people who participated in homosexual acts, consensual or not. This ties hand in hand with sodomy laws, which have been in existence for centuries, and in some places are even around today. In short, sodomy laws were used to criminalize homosexual relationships. This sparked outrage among the gay community, wanting to keep the government out of their bedrooms. However, it was felt by many that these laws could help prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS.
It was big news here this morning. The AIDS epidemic, said the headlines, is spreading so rapidly that it threatens to overwhelm San Francisco's financial ability to deal with it. Some information from our fact file. There are more cases of AIDS among gay men here than anywhere else in the country. Some doctors believe that 50% of the gay population is walking around with the AIDS virus. At least 15,000 men are expected to die in the next 4 years. Dr. David Smith has run the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic since 1967.
It's unfortunate and ironical that we've gone from Make Love Not War and the Flower Children of the 60s to AIDS in the 80s. And
Jim Peters will die of AIDS. We met him on the AIDS ward at San Francisco's General Hospital.
This is the best ward in the hospital, and it's probably the best ward in the nation. Like I said, I somehow always knew I was gay, And to not act on that would be some sort of inner suicide, I think.
It is now the mid-80s, and President Ronald Reagan has only mentioned AIDS for the first time publicly. Although not much, this is a start. The revelation that movie star Rock Hudson was gay and suffering with AIDS was an eye-opener to the general public, as well as the case of Ryan White.
He was a teenager from Indiana who gained national recognition because he was not allowed to re-enter school after being diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. This was a result of receiving a contaminated blood transfusion because he was a hemophiliac. Part of his fame was due to people like Elton John and First Lady Nancy Reagan, who all stepped forward to bring awareness to the disease. Even after being diagnosed with AIDS, Ryan still wanted to be your typical everyday teenager who goes to school and spends time with his friends. After moving to Cicero, Indiana, he and a schoolmate named Jill Stewart were helping to educate the town about AIDS. After being empathetic of those with the disease, people were accepting to Ryan. He was more welcome at his school and even attended school festivities such as prom.
After Ryan's death, Congress passed the Ryan White Comprehensive AIDS Resources Emergency Act, also known as CARE. This was to provide support to those with AIDS who cannot afford treatments or specialized care. He became the face of the epidemic because it proved to many people that this wasn't just a gay disease and could affect anyone. Once it became widely known that anyone could be infected, people began to believe things such as shaking hands with someone with the disease or even being in the same room with them could lead to infection.
As the decades of the 80s drew near its end, it became much more widely recognized that this virus spread through bodily fluids and had nothing to do with being gay. It isn't just celebrities who are being affected, it's been millions of ordinary people and some who are still being affected today. Take for example, Paul Giacinto, a real victim who we had the privilege to talk to in an interview.
I can remember having a boyfriend one day and he dared me to kiss him along Broadway. And I did. We stopped traffic. People stopped their cars, were screaming and yelling at us, cursing at us. I warned them beforehand what could happen. But we did it anyway. We had people curse at us, stare at us, but that was it. We got off lucky. I've been attacked physically in New York. I got away. Thank God, because I had some self-defense training, but it's a horrible experience to have to go through. See someone attacked, even if you're not the target, violates a sense of your own safety.
A quilt was made for the remembrance of those suffering and who died of AIDS. It was October 11th, 1987, and this is the first time the quilt was presented at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. during the National March. The quilt was a bit larger than a football field and had 1,920 panels. The weekend it was displayed, 500,000 people visited the quilt. In the spring of 1988, the quilt went on tour and raised almost $500,000, and the money was given to AIDS supportive organizations. In 1989, the quilt was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Today, the quilt consists of more than 48,000 panels and weighs about 54 tons. They carry thousands among thousands of names and stories of victims with AIDS.
In the 90s, when people like Magic Johnson, a basketball star who got HIV/AIDS through sexual contact, it was further proof that it wasn't gay-related. Despite this, there were still many who felt incorrectly it was the fault of the gay people that this disease was spreading throughout the country.
The time is now 2019. Our acceptance has grown and so have we. The HIV/AIDS epidemic gradually ended and received funding for research. So much more has been found out, and AIDS patients are surviving for so much longer than anyone would have thought. Gay rights have also grown.
In 2015, gay marriage was legalized, and as a whole, most of the country has come to understand that these people deserve their basic human rights too. However, we cannot stray away from the fact that there's still homophobia out there. Look how far we've come. We will go even further in gay rights, and hopefully soon a cure will be discovered for the horrible condition that AIDS really is.